My own son threw my suitcase into the rain and shouted that I was nothing but a burden. At 72, I found myself shivering under a bridge, my dignity washed away with the storm. I felt abandoned, like all the years I gave to raise him had been erased in a single night. But fate had other plans, and when my sister discovered me there, everything changed. They thought I would remain silent, broken. Instead, a storm of truth was waiting, and it would destroy their lies forever. My suitcase hit the pavement with a wet, heavy thud. The rain didn't stop. It kept coming down like the sky was angry for me. My son stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his face tight with disgust. He didn't shout this time. He didn't need to. The silence between us said it all. He'd made up his mind. I had no place in his house anymore, or in his life. I didn't beg. I picked up my suitcase, soaked through by the time I reached the sidewalk. My slippers squished with every step as I walked out into the storm. No umbrella, no coat, just a sweater that was warm 2 hours ago. Behind me, the door slammed shut. That sound stayed with me longer than I'd like to admit. I didn't cry that night. Instead, I walked until my legs gave out. I found a low concrete wall under the overpass, just off the main road. It wasn't safe. It wasn't dry, but it was hidden. I pulled my soaked suitcase under me, leaned against the wall, and listened to the sound of tires splashing through puddles. My body hurt, but not as much as my chest. My bones felt like paper, and my heart felt like ash. A few people passed. No one looked twice. To them, I was just another homeless woman in a city full of them. That was the part that scared me most. I didn't feel like me anymore. I felt invisible, discarded. I kept hearing his voice in my head, the way he said the word burden, like I was some chore, like the years I raised him never happened. I remembered the scraped knees I kissed, the meals I skipped so he could eat. And now, in his eyes, I was just weight. The wind cut harder the longer I sat. I pulled the blanket tighter, one I found in my suitcase, thin and damp. My body shook anyway, not just from cold, from shame, from disbelief. Maybe some of you understand that feeling, when the people you gave everything to look at you like you're nothing. That night, I didn't sleep much. I listened to cars, to sirens, to the sound of something inside me breaking apart. Around 3 in the morning, the rain slowed. I was just starting to nod off when I heard footsteps. Not hurried, not heavy, measured. I looked up, and for a second, I thought I was dreaming. Vivian, my little sister. Her hair was soaked, makeup gone, but she looked at me like she hadn't seen me in 20 years. And maybe, in a way, she hadn't. We hadn't spoken much after she moved to Florida. Life got in the way. Family things. Complicated things. But there she was, standing in front of me like a miracle wrapped in trench coat fabric and fury. She didn't say anything at first. She just knelt down beside me, brushed the wet hair from my face, and put her hand on mine. And that was it. That was the first real human touch I'd felt in weeks, maybe months. She helped me to my feet without a word, picked up my suitcase, and led me to her rental car, like it was the most natural thing in the world. No questions, no judgment. I sat in her car, heat on full blast, blanket around my shoulders, trying not to fall apart. She handed me a thermos of tea, still warm, smelled like honey and mint. I took a sip and felt the first flicker of safety since I left that house. We didn't speak until we hit the highway. "You're coming with me," she said. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I couldn't imagine going anywhere else. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't have to. I think she saw it in my face, in the way I held the tea with both hands, like it was all I had left in the world. The road stretched long and silent. Every few miles, I glanced at her. Same determined eyes, same straight back. Vivian had always been fire where I was water. She burned when people hurt her. I endured. I survived. But that night, I started to wonder if surviving was enough. When we reached the motel outside Tallahassee, she handed me a room key and a bag of clean clothes. I took a hot shower, the first in days, scrubbed off the rain, the dirt, the humiliation, stared at myself in the mirror until the steam blurred my face. Then I slept. Not deeply, not peacefully, but I slept in a bed. And the next morning, when she said we'd be heading south to Clearwater, I didn't ask why. I just followed. Because something inside me had shifted. Not all at once, not loud, but enough to feel it. Maybe you've felt it too. That quiet turn. That moment you realize, this time, I'm not going to let it go. This time, I'm not swallowing my pain just to keep the peace. Not when it costs me everything. If you've ever had someone you love treat you like garbage, if you've ever had to pick yourself up off the ground with nothing but pride and aching joints, then maybe you'll understand what I did next. And trust me, it won't be pretty, but it will be fair. The next morning came fast. I opened my eyes to a low hotel ceiling and the steady hum of the air conditioner. The bed under me was too firm, the sheets scratchy, but compared to concrete and rain, it felt like heaven. My muscles ached from the night before, but my hands were warm for the first time in days. I sat up slowly, wrapping the motel blanket around my shoulders. I wasn't home, but I was somewhere. That was enough. Vivian was already dressed and packing up her things. She moved fast, focused, like she'd been planning something all night. She didn't ask how I slept. She didn't offer small talk. Just picked up my suitcase and said, "We need to get moving." I followed her out to the parking lot. The sky was pale blue, the air thick with humidity, the way Florida always smells before noon. I slid into the passenger seat, and as soon as the doors shut, she put the car in drive. No hesitation. 10 minutes down the road, she pulled into a gas station, left the car running, and told me to wait. She returned with a thermos of fresh coffee, a breakfast sandwich, and a folder. She handed me the folder first. Inside was a printout of a real estate listing, a condominium unit in Clearwater, 2 bedrooms, ocean view, fully furnished. The price made my stomach tighten. I looked at her and she finally spoke again. "That place is yours. I bought it this morning." I didn't say anything. Couldn't. My mouth stayed open for a few seconds before I managed to close it. My hands held the folder like it might break. Vivian kept her eyes on the road. "I already wired the money. It's under your name. No mortgage, no tricks." I turned the page. There were photos. A balcony facing the sea. A kitchen with granite counters. A guest room with a writing desk. It looked like the kind of place someone stayed for 2 weeks every summer. Not the kind of place someone like me lived in full time. But I kept turning. On the last page was a bank receipt. A deposit into a new savings account. $5 million. I looked up. Vivian didn't flinch. "Your savings, yours alone. I've had it set aside for years. You didn't know because I didn't tell you. Now you do." I sat back, folder in my lap, coffee forgotten. My ears rang like someone had set off fireworks in my chest. I couldn't form a full thought. Not one. The numbers sat on the page, too real to ignore, too surreal to believe. She pulled the car back onto the highway. Neither of us said anything for a while. I watched the landscape pass by. Strip malls, palm trees, cheap diners. Things looked normal, but nothing felt normal. Something had shifted inside me, and I couldn't tell yet if it was gratitude or shame. She turned off onto a quieter road, palm-lined and narrow. After a few blocks, we passed a gated entrance. She typed in a code, and the iron gate slid open slowly. A security guard waved at us, and Vivian nodded back. I kept staring straight ahead. The building was low-rise, cream-coloured, with balconies trimmed in white, blue-tiled roofing. It looked like a postcard. Vivian parked in a reserved space near the entrance. She grabbed my suitcase from the trunk and carried it inside without waiting. The lobby smelled like lemon and new carpet. A woman at the front desk smiled and handed Vivian a welcome packet. Vivian pointed at me without speaking. The woman looked at me kindly, the way people look at stray dogs they wish they could help. We rode the elevator in silence. On the third floor, Vivian unlocked the door to Unit 3C and pushed it open. It was brighter than I expected. The walls were soft beige, the couch pale grey. Light poured in through the sliding glass doors that led to the balcony. I walked to the railing and looked out. The ocean stretched to the edge of the sky. I could hear it. Steady, heavy, alive. Behind me, Vivian placed the suitcase down, wiped her hands and said, "This is where you live now, and I'm staying in the unit across the hall for a while, so don't get any ideas about disappearing." I turned, hands still on the railing. I wanted to say thank you, but the words didn't feel like enough. Instead, I nodded. Once. Slow. Vivian came closer. "I know what he did. I know what they've done. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but you will not let them take anything else from you. Not ever again." She looked me in the eye. Her tone was sharp, not sentimental. "This place is yours. The money is yours. And I already contacted Grace." That got my attention. Grace Hollander, her lawyer friend from college. Smart, ruthless, careful. I hadn't seen her in years. "Grace is drafting the documents now. Financial locks, legal shields. Whatever you don't want exposed will stay sealed. And whatever they try to take will be 2 steps ahead." I let out a slow breath. My fingers tightened around the balcony edge. Vivian's voice softened. "You're not a guest here. You're not dependent. You're the owner, and I need you to start acting like one." I stood there a long time after she left. The ocean didn't stop moving, neither did the thoughts in my head. Paul thought he had buried me, that I would rot quietly in a corner of some shelter. He thought shame would keep me silent. He had no idea I was about to bury him with the very things he tried to steal. 3 days after I moved in, Vivian hosted a small welcome gathering at the clubhouse on the ground floor. She didn't ask if I wanted one. She just sent me a text with the time and told me to wear something blue. She had already bought me 2 new outfits and hung them in the closet. I chose the one with long sleeves, a light fabric that didn't draw attention, but made me look like myself again. I arrived a few minutes before 6. The room was softly lit, with finger foods arranged on white platters and a view of the ocean behind a row of glass windows. About a dozen people were there, mostly other residents of the building, retired couples, a few widows, one older man who reminded me of my late husband, though thinner and with a sharper chin. I didn't catch most of their names, but I recognized their warmth, the kind that doesn't ask too much too soon. Vivian made sure to keep me close. She introduced me with just enough detail to be polite, never crossing into anything personal. She never mentioned what had happened. Never mentioned Paul. Just told people I'd come to Clearwater for a fresh start, and was now officially part of the community. Her voice had that steady tone she used when setting boundaries. While she mingled, I found myself at the far end of the room near the window, watching the light fade over the water. I was fine not speaking. I didn't want to explain myself to strangers. It was enough to be somewhere safe, surrounded by people who didn't know what I had been through. That changed when one of the building security guards came in through the side door, not for the party, just on patrol. He looked to be in his late 60s, broad shoulders, close-cut grey hair, badge clipped to his polo shirt. He made a slow loop through the lobby, then paused when he saw me standing near the punch bowl. I nodded politely. He walked over. He pointed to the unit number on my name tag. 3C. That's across from Ms. Vivian's, right? I said it was. He smiled. She's sharp. Doesn't miss a detail. You got a good one looking out for you. I agreed. He glanced toward the elevator, then lowered his voice a notch. You might want to keep an eye on the hallway traffic. We had a report of someone hanging around the mailboxes late last night. Didn't match any resident profiles. Just a heads up. That tightened something in my chest. I thanked him and made a note to tell Vivian. She probably already knew. Nothing got past her. A few minutes later, Vivian raised her glass and tapped a spoon against it. The room quieted. She made a short toast. Simple. Just said she was glad I was here and that second chances were worth celebrating. People clapped, someone whistled, and then it went back to normal. But I noticed the moment she ended her speech, her eyes flicked to the door. She had seen it open. I turned and saw them too, Paul and Marissa. He wore a dress shirt he rarely ironed, but this time it was pressed flat. Marissa was in beige and gold, hair curled, heels clicking softly as she stepped into the room. They smiled as if they belonged. My stomach clenched. Vivian walked straight toward them. I didn't hear what she said, but her face made it clear they were not invited. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cause a scene. But she blocked their path like a wall of glass. Paul looked over her shoulder at me, smiled like none of it had happened, as if the last time he saw me hadn't been in the rain, shouting while I held on to my dignity like a dying flame. I said nothing. My hand gripped the edge of the refreshment table. Vivian motioned to someone and a staff member stepped in. The conversation was short. Paul and Marissa stood their ground for a few seconds longer, then turned and walked out. Marissa didn't even glance back. The room slowly returned to its rhythm. People noticed the interruption, but no one asked questions. I was grateful for that. Vivian came back to my side, picked up a piece of fruit from the tray, and said, "Told you they'd come." I nodded. She'd warned me earlier that morning. She had seen a comment from one of Marissa's friends online. Something too specific to be accidental. Vivian was already 3 moves ahead. After the gathering ended, she walked me back upstairs. We said goodnight in the hallway, and I slipped into my apartment. Inside, I sat on the edge of the couch and waited. Not for anything specific, just waited. They had come. Not to apologize, not to explain. They came to see what they could still get. But now they knew. I was not where they left me. I was not the woman who had walked out into the storm with her suitcase. I was standing, inside, protected, and no longer alone. Still, I didn't feel safe enough to rest. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the side drawer of the hallway cabinet and pulled out a new notebook Vivian had given me. I clicked a pen and wrote one sentence across the top of the page. What they took from me, they will return. Then I drew a line underneath it and wrote 3 words. House. Name. Power. The party had ended, the curtain was up, and they had stepped onto the stage thinking they still controlled the story. But I had the pen now, and I was going to write the rest. Vivian didn't waste time. 2 days after the party, she knocked on my door at 10 sharp with a stack of envelopes in one hand and her tablet in the other. Her hair was pinned up tight, and her expression told me we were past the stage of gentle warnings. She placed everything on the kitchen counter and opened the top folder. "They're going to try again," she said. "But this time, it's not going to be through charm. It'll be legal." I watched her lay out the pages, one by one. Letters, emails, screenshots, digital dust left behind by Paul and Marissa's recent activity. Vivian had quietly paid a private investigator to monitor any financial or legal movement involving my name. What she found was subtle, but unmistakable. Paul had reached out to a small law office out of state, asking about power of attorney transfers and elder care authorizations. Marissa had been messaging someone on Facebook Marketplace about hiring a notary for in-home documentation. Vivian tapped one of the papers. "They're going to make it look official, hand-delivered, personal. They think you're soft enough to sign something if they come in crying." She looked at me, eyes steady. "I need you to do exactly what I say." I didn't argue, not because I was scared, but because I understood something now I hadn't fully accepted before. This wasn't about misunderstanding or distance. This was about control. Paul and Marissa didn't want to help me. They wanted what they thought I no longer deserved to manage. So I told Vivian yes, I would follow her lead. That afternoon, we invited a few neighbours over for coffee. Nothing formal, just a casual afternoon with fruit trays and pastries. Enough people to create a social setting without raising suspicion. Vivian told the concierge to let Paul and Marissa up if they showed. She didn't invite them, but she made sure someone would buzz them in. Then she slipped a recording device under the end table by the couch and sat down like we were expecting the weather to turn. It took less than 20 minutes. Paul knocked. Vivian didn't flinch. I opened the door. He smiled like we were long-lost friends. Marissa stood behind him, holding a gift bag with gold tissue sticking out. She wore pale pink and pearls. They had rehearsed this. Paul stepped in first. Loud greetings, jokes about dropping by while they were in the area. Marissa placed the bag on the table and pulled out a tin of homemade cookies. I said thank you without emotion. Vivian watched quietly from her chair. After 5 minutes of shallow chatter, Paul sat forward, hands folded. "I brought something for you to look at," he said. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stapled document. The front page had bold lettering across the top. Family Wellness and Property Agreement. Vivian took one glance at the title and crossed her legs. Paul slid the papers across the table toward me. "Just something to make things smoother, so we can help out, you know. Coordinate medical stuff. Ease the process in case anything urgent comes up." He smiled again. Too long. Too forced. I picked up the first page and read silently. It was 6 pages long. Buried in the middle was a paragraph labeled Temporary Power Authorization, followed by another labeled Financial Oversight Clause. The language was careful, not overtly predatory, but it gave Paul full access to act on my behalf regarding medical and financial decisions. It also authorized him to open and manage bank accounts under joint access. I set the paper down. I didn't speak. Vivian stood. She walked to the kitchen, took out a second folder, and returned. From it, she pulled a nearly identical document. Only this one had a red line through the middle. "This is a copy of the version you had drafted last week with that paralegal in Kissimmee," she said to Paul. "The original email is time-stamped. The language is word for word." Paul's face froze. Marissa stayed quiet. Vivian turned to me. "Go ahead. Ask them what this is really for." I didn't need to. The silence said everything. Vivian opened the recording app on her tablet and let it run. Then she raised her voice just enough for the neighbors to hear. I want everyone to know, she said, that this document was designed to strip Helen of her financial rights under the guise of assistance. This is what family manipulation looks like. Paul stood up fast. You don't understand what we're trying to do, he said. Marissa grabbed his arm. Vivian stayed calm. No, I understand exactly. And so does the state of Florida. So will the ethics board. So will the community you're trying to impress with fake tears and cookies. Paul's voice cracked. You're making a scene. Vivian laughed once, sharp. Scene? No. This is clarity. She turned to me and nodded. I walked over to the table, picked up the contract they brought, and tore it down the middle. The room went quiet. The neighbors stopped talking. Paul looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I simply held up the torn pages and said, "This is what happens when you mistake quiet for weak." Vivian motioned toward the door. Paul and Marissa walked out, this time without looking back. I sat down slowly, my hands still warm from the paper. Vivian brought me a glass of water. The neighbors murmured, then politely excused themselves. When the room was empty, Vivian spoke low. They'll try something else. I nodded. I knew that too. But what they didn't know was that we were ahead now. And I wasn't just holding the line. I was ready to take everything back, piece by piece, name by name. And this time, they would never see it coming. 3 mornings after I tore their contract in half, I opened my front door and found a white orchid sitting on the welcome mat. No card, no note, just the plant, delicate and perfect, like a silent apology that didn't have the guts to knock. I stood there for a long time, not picking it up. The air was warm, the hallway quiet. Across from me, Vivian's door opened. She stepped out, holding a cup of coffee in one hand, phone in the other. She saw the orchid and stopped. They're switching tactics, she said, not even blinking. I nodded once and left the plant where it was. I stepped back inside, locked the door, and let the silence hold. That evening, they came again. Not together this time. Paul showed up around 6, wearing a blue polo shirt I remembered buying him for a job interview he never got. His smile was softer than usual. He carried a small paper bag from the Italian restaurant on Main. Said he figured I hadn't had dinner yet. I didn't open the screen door. He stood there for a while. Told me I looked good. Asked if I liked the neighborhood. Told me he and Marissa had been talking. That they felt terrible about how things had escalated. Said he missed me. I said nothing. Eventually, he left the bag on the bench by the wall and walked away. I watched him go, never moving. The next morning, it was Marissa's turn. She showed up just before noon with a grocery bag and a book tucked under her arm. Her tone was lighter, almost casual, like this was just something she always did. She didn't bring up the contract. She didn't mention the party. Just said she wanted to stop by, maybe help with errands, cook something if I was tired. She used to call me by my first name. That day, she called me Mum. I watched her through the peephole until she left. She took the groceries with her, left the book. A week passed like that. One would come, then the other, sometimes with food, sometimes flowers. Once, a framed photo of Paul as a boy holding a fishing rod next to me on a pier, a memory they thought could be weaponized. I didn't respond, but I watched, and I recorded. Vivian had given me a small device, no bigger than a car key. It sat by the door, always on when someone came near. I didn't use it to catch them saying anything criminal. I used it to catch the tone, the hesitation, the patterns, because their words weren't about repair, they were about access. Every conversation circled around comfort, concern, and eventually logistics. Bills, accounts, end-of-life planning, the language of thieves pretending to be caretakers. Vivian took the recordings and shared them with Grace. Grace didn't say much at first, just listened, took notes, asked about mail, email, phone calls. Then she flagged something. Paul had requested a change of address for my bank correspondence. He'd done it online, using a phone number from years ago that had once been tied to my name. Grace found it through a soft scan she had requested from a banking contact. It hadn't processed yet, but it was a red flag. Vivian changed the mailbox locks the next day. The night after that, the fire alarm in my hallway went off around 2 in the morning. No fire, just a pulled lever. Ramirez, the guard, reviewed the camera and caught a blurry figure walking through the service corridor 20 minutes earlier. Couldn't see the face, could see the jacket, the same one Paul wore to the party. I asked Vivian to call Grace again. She brought over a laptop the following day and walked me through setting up secure digital alerts. Any access attempt to my accounts, any login from an unrecognized device, any file request tied to my name. I agreed to everything. Then I asked her if she thought they were done. She didn't answer right away. "They'll try the back door now," she finally said. I asked what that meant. She closed the laptop. "They'll go legal again, but not directly. They'll find someone to do it for them. A notary, a mobile witness, a financial advisor who doesn't know the full story." 2 days later, a man in khakis and a collared shirt knocked on my door, said he was from an elder planning group, said my family had requested a quick review of my estate plan just to make sure everything was in order. He smiled like it was normal, like women in their 70s regularly got surprise visits from polite strangers holding clipboards and government-style folders. I told him I already had a team and closed the door. He left fast. Grace filed a formal complaint the next morning with the Florida State Office for Professional Guardianship. Nothing dramatic, just enough to create a record. A trail. I knew what was happening. They were trying to make me look unstable, disorganized, vulnerable. Because if they couldn't make me sign, they'd try to prove I couldn't manage. I didn't speak of it to anyone, not even Vivian. But that night, I sat at my kitchen table and reread the title deed. I ran my fingers over the raised stamp. I whispered my name out loud, not for drama, but for clarity. Then I placed the paper back in its folder, shut the drawer, and locked it. The doorbell rang once more that week. This time, Paul brought wine. Marissa waited by the elevator. He didn't ask to come in. He asked to talk, said things were hard, said families should stick together, said maybe we could talk about some practical things. I didn't open the door. I just spoke through the crack. "Don't come back." His voice cracked, not with sadness, with rage masked as confusion. I didn't respond. I waited. He left. I went back to the kitchen, sat down, and made a list. 3 columns: what they tried, what failed, what would never be forgiven. I was no longer defending anything. I was documenting, preparing. The storm had passed, but the damage it left behind would serve as proof, and I would be the one to carry it forward, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for them to claim. The knock came on a Tuesday afternoon, not rushed, not nervous, just steady enough to suggest familiarity. I was standing in the kitchen when I heard it. I didn't flinch. I walked slowly to the door, just like I had rehearsed with Vivian and Grace. I didn't open it right away. I checked the peephole. Paul stood there, hands empty, no gifts, no folders, no food. That was a change. Behind him, Marissa waited near the elevator, pretending not to look at the door, but I could see the angle of her shoulder. She was listening. I unlocked the door but kept the latch in place. I didn't invite him in. Paul leaned forward slightly. "I just wanted to see how you're doing," he said, voice low. I stayed silent. He continued. "Things have been tense, and I get it. We crossed a line." Still, I said nothing. "I just miss you. So does Marissa. We're not proud of how we handled everything, but we want to make it right. We've been talking. We thought, maybe if we showed you that we're here for you, you'd believe us." He pulled a small envelope from his back pocket and held it up. "It's nothing legal. It's just something we wrote. From the heart." I reached through the crack in the door and took the envelope. Then I closed the door without a word. Inside, I opened it slowly. 2 pages. Handwritten. The tone was sweet, guilt-laced. Words like forgiveness, regret, rebuilding. Marissa's handwriting was on the second page. She mentioned that she had enrolled in a caregiving class, that she wanted to be more helpful. She said family was the only thing that mattered now. I folded the pages, set them on the table, and pressed the button under the edge of the counter. The small recorder clicked on. It had been sitting there for days, waiting. I walked back to the door and opened it fully this time. Paul turned, a flicker of hope passing across his face. "Come in," I said. He stepped inside. Alone. I didn't greet him. I didn't smile. He sat at the far end of the couch, adjusted his sleeves, looked around the room like it was the first time he'd really seen it. "This place is beautiful," he said. "You really settled in." I nodded once. He glanced toward the hallway. "Marissa's just downstairs. She didn't want to crowd you." I said nothing. Paul leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Look, I know we messed up, and I know you're probably never going to fully trust us again. But we are your family. We're not here to fight. We're here to fix things." He paused, let the words hang. "I know you've got things in place now. People helping, lawyers, whatever Vivian lined up. But that doesn't mean you don't need us. You're still our mum. We still want to help." He looked at me, eyes searching. "I don't want your money. I just want peace." I stood near the edge of the living room, watching him, letting the recorder capture every word. He kept going. "I know you've got accounts set up, savings, property, all of that. And that's great. That means you're safe. It just, it doesn't mean we can't be involved. You shouldn't have to manage everything alone." Then he shifted tone. "I mean, what if something happens? A fall? A health scare? Don't you think it makes sense to have someone on file? Someone who can make a decision if you can't?" I turned slightly toward the kitchen. Let him keep speaking. "I've got paperwork. It's basic. Just lets us be listed as emergency contacts. Nothing binding, nothing financial. Just access to records. So we can help. That's all." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thin folder. This was the real reason he came. I didn't move. He placed the folder on the coffee table, sat back like he had just offered something noble. "You don't even have to look at it now. Just think about it. No pressure." I looked at the folder. Pale blue, no markings on the outside. I spoke, finally. "Where is Marissa right now?" He hesitated. "Downstairs. In the car." "Alone?" He nodded. I walked to the balcony door and pulled the curtain back just slightly. She was there, leaning on the hood, talking on the phone. I let the curtain fall. I picked up the folder, walked into the kitchen, and dropped it in the trash. When I returned to the living room, Paul was standing. "I didn't mean to offend you," he said. I said nothing. "I thought you'd appreciate the effort." Still nothing. "I guess Vivian got to you good." That made me pause. I stepped closer. "Vivian didn't do this," I said. "You did." Paul's jaw tensed. The mask slipped for a second. Then he stepped forward, tried to soften his face again. "Please, just consider—" I cut him off. "I already did." I opened the door. He stood there for another moment, like he might say something else. But he didn't. He walked out. I shut the door behind him and locked it. Then I turned off the recorder. 2 days later, Grace came by with a printed transcript. She added it to a folder already thick with statements, photos, logs, a clear timeline of pressure and manipulation. Each entry dated, each line consistent. They hadn't stopped. They had just changed shape. And now, I had proof. The next time they tried anything, it wouldn't be a guessing game. It would be evidence. And it would be enough. When the envelope arrived, it came in a plain white package. No return address. No stamp. Just slipped under my door like a quiet threat. I found it early that morning while making tea, half asleep, slippers dragging across the cool floor. At first, I thought it might be another apology letter, or a card from one of the ladies in the book club. But the weight of it told me otherwise. It wasn't soft. It wasn't personal. It was stiff, heavy. Inside, it wasn't one letter. It was 6 pages, printed, stapled, each page full of language designed to confuse, designed to intimidate. They had hired a lawyer, or at least, they wanted me to think they had. The letter claimed that for health and safety concerns, Paul and Marissa were filing for conservatorship review, that they had evidence of mental decline and were concerned for my well-being, that my recent financial decisions had been erratic and might pose a danger to myself and others. I sat down slowly, rereading that line 3 times. It said my decisions were erratic. Me, the woman who ran an emergency clinic budget for over a decade, the one who handled invoices and vendor disputes while my husband worked nights, the one who stretched 2 retirements through a market crash, and they were calling me unstable. I didn't cry. I laughed. Then I picked up the phone and called Vivian. By noon, Grace was at my door with a copy of the same letter, forwarded from Vivian's office. They had tried sending it there too, likely assuming she would panic or push me to fold. They didn't understand who Vivian was. Grace placed her laptop on the counter and opened a document titled Protective Response Package. It had already been in motion. Grace was just plugging in the final pieces. Transcripts, photos, the audio recording from Paul's visit, copies of the checks they had sent me weeks ago with little notes in the memo lines that said things like, "Just in case you need help deciding." Grace read through the letter with a practiced calm, pointing out phrases clearly lifted from online legal templates. A few of the claims didn't even align with real California law. There were missing details, misused terminology. "They want to scare you," Grace said. "This isn't about your health. It's about control." I nodded. We didn't need to file anything yet. But Grace contacted a friend at the probate court office to log the materials. If anything did surface, we would be ready. By the end of the day, Vivian had sent a formal response, worded like a velvet blade, warm but firm. The kind of letter that didn't just push back, It warned. And then I did something I hadn't planned on. I called my doctor, not because I was worried, but because I wanted records. I booked a full cognitive exam and wellness panel, scheduled the test that same week. I passed every one of them. Blood pressure steady, reflexes tight, memory sharp, processing speed still faster than most people half my age. 2 days later, the results were in a folder in Grace's hands. I asked her to make 3 copies. I sent one to Paul. No note, just the report. A week passed, then 2. No calls, no visits, no letters under the door. I thought for a second maybe they had backed down, but that was the mistake, because while I was savouring the silence, they were busy somewhere else. Vivian got the alert first. She had set up tracking through the property registrar's office. Any time a lien, inquiry, or dispute was filed with my name or address, she would be notified. That's how we found out they had submitted a request to the bank that held my savings account. They were trying to list themselves as co-beneficiaries. It wasn't a legal move. It was a phishing attempt. Marissa had called, posing as me, claimed to have forgotten her online access, and asked to update beneficiaries by phone. The clerk flagged it immediately. My age and voice notes didn't match. The bank froze the request and logged it. But still, they tried. They didn't even care how desperate they looked anymore. I stared at the bank report for a long time that night. Not angry, just quiet. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about erasing me. They wanted my freedom, my dignity, my name on paper, in ink beside theirs. Proof that they had power, that I needed them. Vivian and Grace arranged for the accounts to be legally sealed with third-party oversight. No new names, no beneficiaries. Everything would move to a foundation if anything happened to me. One I had already set up. Quietly. Months ago. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure no one could ever trap me again. Later that week, Grace handed me another envelope. Thicker than the last. Inside were 2 signed affidavits from my previous landlord and neighbour. Witnesses to the nights Paul and Marissa left me outside, refused to open their door, told the kids I was being dramatic. There was also a notarized statement from the community nurse, one who had seen my bruises when I fell. She confirmed no one from my family came to pick me up from urgent care. They wanted to build a case against me. I was already building a wall around myself. Brick by brick, paper by paper, truth by truth. And every page was sharper than the last. There was a line in Grace's summary that stuck with me. Attackers with shallow motives underestimate the power of long memory. She was right. I remembered everything. And now, so would the court, so would the law, and soon, so would they. The invitation came from Paul, a simple text, short and polite. He asked if I'd be willing to come over for dinner at their place next Sunday, said the kids missed me, said they'd like to start fresh. He ended the message with a hopeful line about family and forgiveness. I stared at it for a while, letting the words settle. I knew what this was. I had seen it coming. Vivian had seen it. Grace had predicted it almost to the week. They had tried the legal pressure. That had failed. The false conservatorship attempt didn't land. The beneficiary trick was exposed. And now came the charm offensive. Still, I agreed. I told him I'd be there at 6. On Sunday, I wore a soft navy dress, the one with the high collar and long sleeves. I pinned back my hair and wore my gold watch, the one Charles gave me on our 25th anniversary. I carried nothing but a slim envelope in my handbag and my calmest expression. The house hadn't changed. White siding, fresh mulch, a new wreath on the door, as if any of that could disguise the bitterness that clung to the walls. Marissa greeted me with a smile stretched too wide. Her eyes flicked over my outfit, trying to read it like a signal. She stepped aside, letting me in with a hand on my back, firm and controlling. The dining table was set for 7. Paul sat at the head. The kids were dressed up, their shirts too stiff for a Sunday. Their eyes darted between me and their parents. We sat. We ate. The food was good, a little too perfect. They talked about the children's grades, about how Paul had been considering a job change. Marissa complimented the dish she had made, twice, with the kind of tone that needed approval. I nodded politely, responded when asked. I didn't bring up anything from the past few months, and they didn't either. Not directly. But about halfway through dessert, Paul leaned back in his chair and let out a sigh. I've been thinking a lot lately, he said, about how things got complicated. And I know we all made mistakes, but I hate the distance between us. Marissa reached for his hand. And with the kids getting older, she added, we just don't want any regrets. We want them to know what real family looks like. It was my turn to nod. I appreciate that, I said. I really do. They smiled, and then Paul said it. I was wondering, Mum, if we could talk sometime about how we move forward. Maybe review some of the decisions that were made when things were tense, especially regarding estate matters. There it was, the soft glove pulled off, the hand beneath it, reaching. I let the pause settle, just long enough. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. Of course, I said, but I think it's best we're all clear, so I had something drawn up. I slid the envelope across the table. Marissa's fingers twitched before she caught herself. Paul picked it up and opened it. Inside was a notarized addendum. It outlined the permanent establishment of the Ruth Ellery Foundation, the non-profit I had formed. It confirmed that the house I now lived in, the bank accounts, the trust fund, everything, was legally and irrevocably tied to the foundation. It listed the beneficiaries, a scholarship program for single mothers over 60, a care fund for elderly abuse victims, and a community medical outreach named after Charles. Paul's face stiffened. Marissa's smile cracked at the edges. You see, I said gently, I've thought about this too. A lot, and I realized I don't want to spend the rest of my life worried about who deserves what, or who thinks they earned a slice of something they never built. Paul swallowed hard. I could see the heat behind his eyes. He was holding it back, trying to stay in control. I'm not cutting you off, I added, but I am choosing peace and clarity and protection. No one said anything. The kids were frozen, confused, too young to understand the undercurrent, but old enough to feel the tension settle thick in the air. I stood up slowly. Dinner was lovely. Thank you. Marissa started to speak, but the words stumbled. She tried to smile again, but gave up halfway. At the door, Paul followed me. Is this it? He said, voice low. I didn't stop walking. Mum, he said again, a little louder, a little sharper. We were trying to make things right. I turned back, finally. No, I said. You were trying to regain access. He flinched. But what you lost was trust, and I don't hand that out like pie at Thanksgiving. I left. Back in my car, I exhaled. It was done. No screaming, no courtroom, just the truth, documented, signed, sealed, and delivered. They had underestimated me, not just as a mother, or a widow, or an old woman. They had underestimated my memory, my resolve, my ability to plan. And now, for the first time in years, I slept that night without locking the door twice. because they couldn't reach me anymore. Not in law, not in lies, not in legacy. 3 days after that dinner, I woke up to the sound of gravel crunching outside my window. I moved the curtain just slightly, not enough to be seen. Paul's truck sat in the driveway. He stayed in the cab for a moment, then got out, pacing a bit like he hadn't decided what he came here to do. It was still early, not even 8. The beach fog hadn't lifted yet. The dew sat on the window like a veil between me and whatever this was. I didn't open the door. He knocked once, then twice more, softer. Then he left. 10 minutes later, a call came in. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short. His voice, calm but strained. He said he respected my choice, that they would give me space, that they understood now where I stood. It almost felt civil. Almost. But by afternoon I knew something had shifted. Vivian called me, voice tight. She had just gotten off a call from someone she knew at the clerk's office. Apparently a new motion had been filed. Paul and Marissa were attempting to contest my mental fitness again, this time under a different clause. They were trying to use my foundation as proof that I was being manipulated, financially exploited, that I couldn't possibly be acting with full mental clarity. I didn't flinch. Vivian asked if I wanted her to respond. I told her no, not yet. Because sometimes you wait. You let people bury themselves deeper. You let the rope stretch long enough to make the fall final. The next morning, I drove into town. Not to see a lawyer, not to respond legally. I went to the bakery. Inside, the owner, Jackie, gave me a long look and then smiled. She was older than me by 5 years, walked with a cane, ran the place with her granddaughter. We had talked a few times before about the community grant I had set up. I sat down with her, told her I had a proposition. That afternoon, we printed flyers. By the next day, posters were hanging in libraries, clinics, shelters. Ruth Ellery Foundation, launching community days. Free workshops, meals, consultations for older women looking to re-enter the workforce, escape isolation, protect their estates. The event was held at the town hall, just 2 blocks from Paul's insurance office. 200 people showed up. By the end of the week, the foundation was in the local paper, then in a regional one, then in a national blog for elder rights. I stayed quiet through it all. I didn't need to speak. Visibility was its own defense. On Friday, Grace dropped by. She had heard that Paul and Marissa were meeting with a second attorney, someone aggressive, someone loud. She warned me they weren't backing down. I smiled. I thanked her. And then I handed her a set of documents. They weren't for me. They were for the board of the foundation. People we had carefully chosen, none of them family, all of them strong. I had signed over the house, the remaining accounts, and even my name rights to the foundation's protection clause, meaning no matter what accusation came my way, nothing could be liquidated or touched without full board approval. Grace's eyes widened as she read it. "You're sealing every door." I nodded. "Let them try," I said. "They're only proving my point." On Sunday, my doorbell rang again. This time it was Olivia. She was holding flowers, cheap ones, the kind you buy at a gas station in a hurry. Her eyes were soft, apologetic, but I'd learned to see through softness. It could be a weapon, just like rage. She stepped into the living room when I didn't stop her. "I didn't know they were filing again," she said. "I swear." I waited. "I just want us to go back," she added, "before everything got complicated." She sat, looked around the room like she was trying to memorize it. Then came the next line. "If there's anything we need to sign to show support, Anything to put this behind us. We'll do it. And there it was. She hadn't come for reconciliation. She came to test the temperature. I stood. She didn't move. I know what you're doing, I said calmly. And I want you to remember something. This house, this peace, this life, I built it without you. I survived everything you and Paul threw at me, and I did it in silence. Her face dropped. I stayed quiet out of respect. But don't mistake quiet for weak. She stood too now, her voice cracked. Paul's falling apart. He's not eating. He's losing clients. He's blaming me. I'm scared. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, not cruelly, just finally, that's not my burden anymore. She left. That night, I slept with the window open. I listened to the ocean like I used to with Charles. And for the first time since all of it began, I didn't feel like I was bracing for a blow. I felt done, not defeated, complete. Because there is a moment, after the storm, when silence returns, and it isn't empty, it's earned. By Monday morning, I could sense a shift in the air. It was subtle at first, just the way the neighborhood seemed quieter, as if holding its breath. Something was coming, and I knew it wouldn't be gentle. Vivian called just past noon. Her voice was calm but direct. The court date's been set, she said. They pushed it fast. They're confident. But they made a mistake, Ruth. A big one. I didn't respond right away. I knew Vivian well enough to wait. They submitted evidence, she continued. Financial records, letters, emails, statements. She paused again, letting the silence underline what came next. They forged your signature. I sat very still. She explained. The documents Paul and Marissa had filed claimed I had granted them power of attorney for the foundation, that I had transferred the right to amend its charter. It was bold, reckless. They had faked an entire meeting, a board vote, even notarized it. Vivian had already sent the file to the forensic examiner. But she didn't stop there. She also had a quiet lunch that weekend with one of the notaries they claimed had witnessed the document. He didn't remember the meeting. He didn't remember me, because it never happened. That was the crack. And through that crack, everything unraveled. By Wednesday, the examiner's report was ready. Not only were the signatures inconsistent, but the timestamp metadata on the PDF files revealed they had been backdated. Sloppily. One document was supposedly signed at a cafe in San Luis Obispo, a place that had been permanently closed for renovations at the time. Another referenced a foundation member who had stepped down 3 months earlier. They hadn't just lied, they had been lazy. That's when Vivian made her move. She filed a motion for fraud and perjury. She submitted the report, the witness statement from the notary, and a statement from the board chair of the foundation. It wasn't just a response anymore. It was a full-blown countersuit. But it didn't end there. A day later, the county legal office reached out. Turns out, attempting to defraud a registered non-profit isn't just a civil matter. It can be criminal. And because the foundation dealt with elder welfare, there was a second layer of protection. An automatic review had been triggered the moment Vivian filed her countersuit. The district attorney's office wanted to talk. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I watered my plants. I baked cornbread. I walked the beach every morning before the sun was up. But inside, I felt a shift. Not anger anymore. Not even justice. Just clarity. They had drawn the line, crossed it, painted it red. And now the town would see. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. I arrived early, sat in the second row with Vivian beside me. The courtroom was modest, nothing like on TV, just cold air and wooden benches and the low murmur of anticipation. Paul sat 3 rows ahead with Marissa. Neither looked back. The judge was swift. He reviewed the evidence, allowed brief statements. Vivian, ever composed, laid everything out, clean, factual, undeniable. She didn't even need to raise her voice. The forensics, the witness, the timelines, all of it. When it was Paul's turn, his lawyer fumbled, tried to claim I had authorized it verbally, that I had memory issues, that I had misunderstood. Vivian simply raised the clinic reports, showing I had passed a full cognitive evaluation just a month earlier. The same report they themselves had submitted in a previous filing to argue I had capacity to make decisions they disagreed with. They had contradicted themselves. In writing. Twice. The judge called for a recess. Outside, I stood by the courthouse steps while Vivian spoke with the DA's representative. The sun was harsh, but I welcomed it. Let it warm the top of my head. Let it fill the silence. Then I heard it. "Mom." I turned. Paul was walking toward me alone. His face was drawn, paler than I remembered. His voice softer. "You're really doing this," he said. I looked at him. "No," I said. "You did this." His shoulders slumped. Like for the first time, he realized he couldn't shift it back onto me. "I didn't think it would go this far," he muttered. I nodded. That's the thing with lines. Once you cross them, you don't get to decide where they end. He looked like he wanted to say more, but his mouth closed instead. Vivian stepped up beside me. "We should head back in." We did. When the judge returned, he didn't delay. Motion granted. The forged documents were dismissed as invalid. The Foundation Charter was protected. A referral had been made to the district attorney's office for further investigation, and with that, it was over. At least in the eyes of the court. But for me, it was something deeper. I had stood in front of the system that once ignored women like me, brushed off our voices, assumed we were too frail or confused or overly emotional, and I had been heard. I didn't win because I yelled louder. I won because I refused to look away. I won because I kept my records, told the truth, and trusted the silence to do its work. That night, I sat on the porch with Vivian and Grace. We shared peach pie and let the breeze roll in. None of us said much. We didn't need to. The truth had spoken for us, and for once, it had been enough. 2 days after the verdict, I walked through my garden with scissors in hand. The air was crisp with the first bite of fall, and the sun sat lower, casting everything in amber. The lavender bushes had grown wild again. I clipped them gently, bundle by bundle, letting the scent fill the quiet space around me. That's how I've always come back to myself, through something ordinary. Vivian had called earlier that morning. Her tone was different now, lighter, even warm. "County prosecutor's office is moving forward," she said. "Formal charges, fraud, forgery, attempted misappropriation of non-profit assets, 3 counts." I thanked her. But inside there was no burst of joy, no triumphant fist in the air, only the calm weight of inevitability. This was never about revenge. It was about the truth, being seen, being heard, and standing my ground when every part of me had been dismissed. Paul hadn't called since the hearing. Not a message, not a letter, not a single sign of regret. I imagined him sitting in his house, blinds drawn, phone in hand, trying to craft a sentence that wouldn't make him look small. But there were none. The silence said enough. Marissa had been spotted leaving town. Grace saw her packing up boxes from the back of her Range Rover behind the old bakery. No goodbye. No public apology, just a quiet retreat. That was how it always was with people like her. They vanished when the mirrors turned toward them. Later that afternoon, Grace dropped by. She brought over a box of old photos she had rescued from the storage unit I had once shared with Paul. I hadn't asked her to. She just did it. We sat at the kitchen table, sifting through memories. My wedding day, Paul as a toddler, clinging to my leg with that stubborn pout. Christmas in Colorado when the power went out and we lit the whole cabin with candles. I looked at those images, not with bitterness, but with distance, like artifacts of someone else's life, a version of me that had believed love, effort, and loyalty could bend anyone into goodness. Grace found a photo I hadn't seen in years. It was from my 50th birthday, taken on the deck of our old lake house. My husband stood beside me, his arm around my shoulder. Paul stood behind him, beaming. We had just finished a round of grilled salmon. I remembered thinking, in that exact moment, how lucky I was. I pressed the photo flat against the table and stared at it. Not in sorrow, but in reflection. That woman, that version of me, had no idea how quickly that warmth would turn, how thin the line between affection and entitlement could be. But she wasn't wrong to hope. She wasn't wrong to love. She was just unprepared. By nightfall, I had made a decision. The community centre called the next morning, confirming space for the event. I had decided to host a gathering for the foundation's beneficiaries and partners. Not a gala, nothing showy, just a quiet celebration. A thank you, a circle of resilience. Vivian offered to help with the logistics. She was already drafting the press release. The news outlets had picked up the story since the court ruling. Elderly woman wins battle over forged control of non-profit, the headlines read. But that wasn't the story. Not really. The story was about what happens when people assume you'll stay quiet because of your age, when they forget that years do not weaken you, they sharpen you. I visited the Foundation's new office space that afternoon. It was smaller than the old one, but more purposeful. A few of the younger volunteers were there painting walls a soft sage green. A woman named Liana had just moved from Oregon to work full-time on our rural support program. She hugged me tight when I walked in. "You saved this place," she said. I smiled, but inside I knew the truth. No, I had simply refused to let it be stolen. Back home, I sat by the window and wrote a letter. Not to Paul, not to the court, but to myself. A letter that began with, "I did not break," and ended with, "and I will not disappear." Because that is what this entire ordeal had tried to do, to erase me, to write over me with legal tricks and whispered doubts. But I stayed. I stood. I let the fire rise, and I did not run from it. The next day, my neighbor stopped me at the postbox. "Ruth," he said, "my wife and I read the article. What you did, that was something." I thanked him and moved on, not because I wasn't touched, but because I had spent enough time letting other people's opinions define my worth. Now I walked at my own pace. That evening, the sky opened with rain, steady, not violent. I made tea and wrapped myself in a quilt stitched decades ago, and I felt something I hadn't in months. Stillness. It wasn't peace, not quite, but it was the beginning of it. I thought of all the women I had met at the centre, the single mothers, the grandmothers raising grandkids, the widows starting over at 70. We were not fragile. We were not relics. We were survivors with memories long enough to outlast betrayal. And I was one of them. Not broken, not bitter, just awake. 3 weeks after the verdict, I stood on the small stage at the new community centre, holding a microphone with hands that no longer shook. In front of me were nearly 100 faces. Some I knew well. Some I had helped through hard winters, or long divorces, or lonely birthdays. Some I had never met, but they were there because the foundation had reached them in one way or another. That was enough. The room wasn't fancy. Folding chairs, coffee urns on plastic tables, a few old ceiling fans humming above. But the walls were freshly painted and lined with photos from our programs: women learning trades, elder care volunteers hugging patients, children laughing beside packed donation boxes. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't want to perform. I just told the truth. This organization was never about money, I said slowly, pausing to steady my breath. It was about not being erased, about proving that the second half of your life can be just as powerful as the first, maybe even more. They clapped, but I didn't let the moment linger. I handed the mic to Liana and stepped off the stage. She was the future now. Her voice, her leadership, her energy. I had built the bones. They would carry the rest. After the event, people stayed. Some cried. Some hugged me. One woman slipped me a note that simply said, "Because of you, I filed for custody of my grandson." I tucked the note into my coat pocket and left through the back door. The sun had already set. Autumn was thinning into early winter. I could smell frost coming. When I got home, the porch light was on. Grace had left a casserole dish by the door with a napkin taped on top. "Rest. You earned it." Inside, I lit the fireplace and poured myself a small glass of wine. The house, once too quiet, now felt like sanctuary. Paul never reached out. I had imagined for a long time some grand apology, a tearful phone call, a letter filled with regret. But it never came. Instead, I received a package from his lawyer. Inside was a signed settlement form releasing any remaining claims to the foundation or the properties still in my name. No note, no explanation. He had chosen silence over redemption. I accepted it, not because I forgave him, but because I no longer needed anything from him. His chapter in my life had closed long ago. He just hadn't noticed until the door locked behind him. The next morning, I donated the last of his childhood keepsakes to the local shelter thrift shop. Not out of anger, just clarity. Some things don't need to be stored. They need to be let go. Over the following days, I began walking every morning, 3 miles at sunrise, sometimes alone, sometimes with neighbors who joined me quietly. We never talked about what happened. We didn't need to. They had watched it unfold in the papers, on television, across whispers in grocery aisles. But walking with them was a kind of unspoken respect, and that was more valuable than any apology. One morning on the trail behind the orchard, I spotted a young woman sitting on a bench with her child. She looked tired, like the world had sat on her chest for too long. As I passed by, she stopped me. "You're Ruth, right? The woman who fought back?" I smiled gently. "I'm Ruth, but I didn't fight. I just refused to vanish." Her eyes welled up. "Thank you," she whispered. That was it. No more words. That afternoon, I planted 3 new apple trees at the edge of my yard. I don't know if I'll live to see them bear fruit. But planting something you may never harvest is an act of belief, not in yourself, but in the world after you. Grace visited again that weekend. We drank tea, laughed about the news segment that had mispronounced her name, and talked about hosting a writing workshop for retired women next spring. Stories, she said, were the last thing they couldn't steal. When she left, I stood at the window and watched the wind move through the trees, the kind of wind that doesn't knock things down, but reminds you they can stand. I did not vanish. I rebuilt. I redefined, and I stayed whole. If you've ever felt dismissed, erased, or underestimated just because of your age, your silence, or your kindness, know this. You still have the power to draw the line, to reclaim your space, to plant something new. If my story spoke to a part of your heart today, share this with someone who needs to hear it too. Or just take a breath and remind yourself you are not done, you are not invisible, you are still writing your story, and maybe it's just getting good.